Imagine a school science project that didn't just win, like, a blue ribbon, but literally created a brand new kind of super predator.
Yeah, I mean, it genuinely sounds like the origin story of a comic book hero. You've
Yeah.
got these isolated mountain bases, desperate military commanders, and the deliberate mixing of wild Carpathian wolves with domestic dogs.
It is so wild. And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We've got this fascinating stack of historical and scientific notes sitting right here in front of us, and we are uncovering the origin story of the Czechoslovakian Wolfdog.
Yep, the Czechoslovensky Wolfdog.
Exactly. So for you listening, forget whatever you learned in biology class. We are skipping the boring textbook Punnett squares today. This is the ultimate real-life genetics lesson.
It really is.
But before we get into the crazy stuff, we have to set the stage. Because this wasn't some backyard hobbyist trying to create, a cool-looking pet or start a weird fashion trend, was it?
Oh, not at all. No. What we are looking at in these notes is actually one of the most ambitious, rigorous dog breeding projects of the entire 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah, the goal wasn't about aesthetics at all. It was purely functional, deeply scientific, and just born out of absolute necessity.
Okay, let's unpack this because my very first thought, and probably your first thought listening to this, is just why?
All right, why do it?
Yeah, why on earth would anyone look at a perfectly good domestic working dog and think, you know what this needs? Untamable wild predator DNA.
Well, to understand the why, we have to look at the very real, very urgent problem sitting on the desk of Colonel Karel Hartl in 1955.
Okay.
He was directing this initiative for the Czechoslovak border guard. And the problem was simple but catastrophic. Their standard working dogs were failing.
Wait, failing how? Because, we usually think of German Shepherds as the ultimate unbreakable working breed. They're police dogs, military dogs. They're supposed to be tough as nails.
And they are tough, under normal civilized conditions, but the border guard wasn't operating in a city park.
Right.
They were patrolling the Omava and Tatra mountains. So we are talking about brutal, freezing, unforgiving environments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, deep, blinding snow, sub-zero wind chills, treacherous, icy terrain. And in those conditions, the German Shepherds were really struggling.
I can imagine.
Their stamina was just bottoming out. They were suffering from severe health problems like frostbite and joint issues. They just couldn't maintain the level of vigilance required for those massive multi-hour patrols in a frozen wilderness.
It's like they were running high-end software and hardware that just kept freezing up.
That is a great way to visualize it, actually.
Because the training was there, the loyalty was there, but the physical chassis of the dog just couldn't handle the temperature drops. They needed a hardware upgrade.
Exactly. The software, the obedience and the desire to please a human handler, that was flawless, but the biological hardware was breaking down.
So what did they do?
So Hartl looked out into those same frozen forests for a solution. He observed that wild Carpathian wolves were thriving in the exact same conditions that were destroying his dogs.
Oh, interesting.
Wolves possess incredible raw endurance. They have this dense double-layer coat that makes them almost impervious to the cold, and they have a natural instinctual vigilance that just never switches off.
Basically the perfect winter machine.
Exactly. And he also noted historical precedents like Nordic sled dogs, where breeders had actually utilized wolf blood centuries ago to strengthen their working teams.
Okay, so Hartl decides to literally bring the wolf into the laboratory. Specifically, this border guard facility in Libiovice. And this is what I find so fascinating.
Yeah.
This wasn't just throwing a wild wolf and a German Shepherd into a kennel and hoping nature took its course. This was a highly controlled scientific experiment.
Oh, very much so. They treated it like a complex engineering problem, just using biology instead of mechanics. They weren't merely observing what the puppies look like. The project tracked specific, measurable scientific parameters.
Like what?
Well, they started by measuring fertility, because cross-species hybrids are often sterile.
Right.
Then they rigorously tracked the heritability of anatomical traits, things like paw size, fur density, skull shape, and critically, they tested how these animals formed conditioned reflexes.
Okay, break that down for us. What does tracking a conditioned reflex actually look like in a dog versus a wolf?
It's basically the science of how an animal learns cause and effect. So think of Pavlov's bell.
Yeah.
With a domestic German Shepherd, you teach it that a specific command results in a reward. They learn it quickly because thousands of years of domestication have hardwired them to look to humans for direction.
They want to please us.
Right. But a wild wolf has totally different conditioned reflexes. Their brains are wired for independent survival. They question their environment. So the scientists needed to measure exactly where these new hybrids would fall on that spectrum of learning.
And it goes even deeper than that.
Mm.
Looking at the notes, they were literally measuring physiological differences too.
Yeah.
Brain capacity,
Mhm.
scent tracking abilities under extreme duress, even the speed at which their muscles regenerated after exhaustion. Which actually brings us to the very first massive milestone of the experiment. Mark your calendars for this one. May 26, 1958.
A big day.
Huge day. This is the day the first hybrid puppies are born. The proud parents are a wild Carpathian she-wolf named Britta and a German shepherd named Caesar.
Yep, and these puppies formed what's called the F1 generation, the very first line of direct half-and-half hybrids. And anatomically, these dogs were incredible. They looked about 70 to 75% similar to a wild wolf.
Wait, so if they had the physical hardware of a wolf, didn't the army get exactly what they wanted? I mean, mission accomplished, right? Pack up the lab, send them to the mountains.
You would definitely think so, but no. The military had accidentally created a monster.
Oh, no.
The F1 generation was a complete behavioral disaster. Anatomically, yes, they had the wolf hardware, but they also had the wolf software, and that software was wildly incompatible with military duty.
What were they doing that made them so useless?
It comes down to a concept behaviorists call critical distance. These F1 hybrids exhibited extreme wolf shyness and this deeply hardwired instinctual distrust of anything unfamiliar.
Okay, so they were just skittish.
It's way more than just being skittish. In a normal domestic dog, you can train them to accept new handlers, ignore loud noises, or walk through a crowd. But a wild predator's brain works differently.
How so?
If a stranger crossed that invisible critical distance line, the hybrid wouldn't just bark a warning. It would instantly trigger a massive fight-or-flight response.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they would panic, completely ignore their handler, and often resort to severe, unpredictable aggression just to escape.
Yeah.
You absolutely cannot deploy a military service dog that might panic and attack the moment a patrol gets messy.
Yeah, that is terrifying. It just goes to show how deeply entrenched those survival instincts really are. But there's another detail about these F1 pups that absolutely blew my mind.
The kennel behavior.
Yes, how they acted inside the kennels with the normal dogs.
Right, the pack dynamics. It's a brilliant illustration of the tension between domestic submission and wild dominance. While they were young puppies, these F1 hybrids were actually quite manageable.
So really?
Yeah, they would submit to the adult domestic dogs in the kennel. They played the role of the subordinate pup perfectly.
But then they hit puberty, the 8 to 10 month mark.
The teenage phase, yes. And just like human teenagers, they rebelled, but with the physical strength of an apex predator.
Yikes.
Once they hit that developmental milestone, their wild instincts just fully activated. They suddenly stopped seeing the domestic German shepherds as their leaders.
Right.
They began to challenge them, fighting for dominance and position within the pack hierarchy. And because they possessed the sheer physical power, thicker skin, and relentless drive of a wolf,
They won.
they almost always won those fights, yeah.
So picture this if you're listening. You've got these incredibly strong, totally untamable teenage wolf dogs running the kennels. They are terrified of strangers, useless for patrol, and beating up your highly trained German shepherds.
It was a mess.
Most people at this point would just throw their hands up, declare the experiment a failure, and go buy some warmer coats for the normal dogs.
It definitely would have been the easy way out. But Karel Hartl was a scientist to his core. He didn't see a failure. He saw raw, unrefined data.
Interesting.
He proved that the endurance and health traits were successfully transferred to those hybrids. He just needed to figure out how to filter out the wild behavioral traits.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. They used a genetic process called backcrossing. They didn't just breed the F1 hybrids with each other.
Right, that would just make more F1s.
Exactly. They took those half-wolf, uncontrollable teenagers, and they bred them back with pure German shepherds. I was trying to explain this to a friend, and I thought of it like making a giant pot of chili.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you have this incredibly potent, mind-meltingly spicy hot sauce, that's the wolf DNA, you don't want to eat a whole spoonful of it. That's the F1 generation. Too intense.
Way too intense.
All right, so you just keep diluting it, stirring it into bigger and bigger pots of chili until you're left with just one tiny perfect drop of heat that elevates the whole dish. You just want that tiny 6.25% drop of wolf blood.
It's a fun analogy, but it's actually missing the most crucial part of what Hartl was doing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because if you just dilute hot sauce into a massive pot of chili, you eventually lose the flavor entirely. It just waters everything down, the good and the bad. What these scientists were doing was more like a highly targeted filter.
Oh, okay.
With every single back cross, they rigorously tested the new litters of puppies. They didn't just keep them all, they systematically eliminated the pups that showed fear or aggression.
I see.
And they only kept the pups that retained the wolf's physical engine but had the dog's domestic steering wheel. So it wasn't just dilution, it was targeted extraction of specific traits.
Okay, hold on, though. I need to push back on this 6.25% number that keeps popping up in the research, because by the time they reached the third and fourth generations of these pups, the wolf blood was technically calculated at 6.25%.
Correct.
But if an animal is basically 94% German Shepherd, isn't it just a German Shepherd again? Like, how does a measly 6% of wild DNA turn it into a superdog?
That is the million-dollar question in genetics. It's not just about the overall volume of DNA. It's about which specific alleles, the gene variants, are being expressed.
Okay.
Because they were selectively filtering for physical performance over multiple generations, that 6.25% represented the most dominant, highly impactful physical traits of the wild wolf.
The heavy winter coat, the denser bone structure.
Exactly, and the hyper-efficient metabolism. At that specific ratio, the alleles responsible for wild behavior became recessive or were bred out entirely, while the alleles for physical survival took center stage.
So the software and the hardware finally matched, the dog steering wheel and the wolf engine.
Precisely. They became trainable. They could handle human interaction and complex obedience tasks without triggering that wild, critical distance response. But physically, they operated on an entirely different level than a domestic dog.
We really need to geek out over the sheer stats of these final dogs for a second, because calling them super dogs is barely an exaggeration. The numbers are staggering.
Oh, absolutely. What's most fascinating here is the biological mechanism behind their physical regeneration. The scientists put these newly stabilized wolf dogs through a grueling 100-kilometer run.
And to put that in perspective for you listening, that is roughly 62 miles of incredibly difficult, snowy mountain terrain.
Which is an ultra-marathon for a dog.
Literally an ultramarathon.
And after running that incredible distance, the wolf dogs required only 3 to 4 hours of rest before they were fully regenerated and ready to perform at maximum capacity again.
Wait, 3 to 4 hours?
It was 3 to 4 hours, yeah.
You sleep longer than that on a lazy Sunday. How is that biologically possible? And how did the purebred German Shepherds compare in the exact same testing conditions?
Well, the German Shepherds were tested on a route half that distance, only 50 kilometers. And even with half the workload, they required 10 to 12 hours of recovery time.
That is a massive difference.
It is. The difference comes down to metabolic efficiency and muscle fiber. The wolf DNA granted these hybrids an incredible capacity for aerobic respiration.
Meaning they breed better.
Partially, but their bodies were drastically better at processing lactic acid, the chemical that makes your muscles burn and cramp when you run.
Oh, right.
While the domestic dog's muscles were breaking down and filling with waste products, the wolf dog's metabolism was clearing that waste out almost as fast as it was being created.
So the wolf dog runs twice as far and recovers 3 times as fast simply because its wild genetics process cellular waste better. That is incredible.
It was an unparalleled success, and it wasn't just stamina either.
What else?
The wild alleles also gave these dogs a superior lung capacity and vastly improved night vision, which gave them a massive advantage for nighttime border patrols.
Oh, that makes sense.
They also possessed an incredible, almost magnetic sense of terrain orientation. They could navigate blinding snowstorms or dense forests without losing their bearings. They had successfully captured the biological mechanics of wild survival.
It's just a brilliant achievement. But building a biological machine like this doesn't happen overnight. It took, 25 years of meticulous tracking and breeding to perfect this?
Around 25 years, yes.
And to do it, they had to overcome a massive biological hurdle. Genetic bottlenecks. Because if you just keep breeding the descendants of that first wolf, Brita, over and over, you run into trouble.
Severe trouble. If you rely on too small of a gene pool, you trigger inbreeding depression.
The immune system crashes.
Exactly. The immune system crashes, genetic defects multiply, and you lose the very vigor and health you're trying to capture in the first place. To build a sustainable breed, you need genetic diversity.
which is why the entire genetic foundation of this new breed rests on the shoulders of 4 distinct wolves. 4 pillars. They didn't just use Brita.
No, they had to bring in fresh DNA.
Right. So a decade later, in 1968, they brought in a male wolf named Argo. Then in 1974, they went back to the wild again to find a wolf named Arik to create a specific Slovak branch. And finally, they added one last infusion of fresh wild DNA from a she-wolf named Leddi in 1983.
Yes.
So those 4 wild animals, brought in to keep the gene pool wide and healthy, are the ancestors of every single Czechoslovakian Wolfdog alive today.
And right around the time they introduced that third wolf, Arik, we see a massive pivot in the story.
Oh.
Around 1965, the official military experiment actually ended. The Army had gotten their data, they had successfully upgraded their hardware, but the project didn't stop.
What happened?
It evolved from a secret military utility into a passionate quest by Karel Hartl to establish these dogs as a brand new, officially recognized national breed.
But you can't just invent a new dog breed and expect everyone to clap for you. I mean, whenever you disrupt the status quo, you face resistance. And the traditional dog breeders, the purist cynologists, absolutely hated this project.
Oh, they were deeply, fundamentally opposed to it. To understand their mindset, you have to realize that for centuries, the entire philosophy of domestic dog breeding has been about moving away from the wild.
Right, making them tamer.
It's about creating predictable, compliant, specialized animals. Prominent historical purists, like the followers of Max von Stephanitz, viewed the domestic dog as an evolutionary triumph over the wild.
It's kind of like how traditionalists view video games.
How do you mean?
Imagine someone playing a highly regulated traditional sport, and then someone else walks in using a cheat code or a modded controller. The purists felt like adding wild wolf DNA wasn't a valid upgrade. It was a contamination of the rules.
That's a very accurate comparison.
They feared that acknowledging these hybrids would validate ruining established domestic traits. They literally viewed it as an evolutionary step backward.
They did. They believed bringing the wolf back into the gene pool was undoing thousands of years of human work. But Karel Hartl and another key figure, Major František Rosick, they refused to back down.
Good for them.
They knew what they had created. They had the scientific data, they had the physical proof of these metabolically superior animals, and they were ready to fight the establishment.
And they just sheer-willed this breed into existence through pure determination. They spent decades lobbying, presenting their data, and battling the purists. We can actually track the timeline of their victory, and it is really satisfying.
It really is.
In 1982, the Czechoslovakian Wolfdog was finally recognized as an official national breed in Czechoslovakia.
A huge domestic win. But the ultimate boss battle, to use your gaming analogy, was the FCI, the Fédération Cynologique Internationale.
Right.
That is the global governing body for dog breeds. If the FCI doesn't recognize you, you don't officially exist on the world stage. But in 1989, in Helsinki, the breed was finally granted preliminary recognition.
The foot in the door. The purists were losing ground.
And then came the final validation. On June 1st, 1999, at an assembly in Mexico, after more than 40 years of scientific labor, debate, and perseverance, the FCI granted the breed full, definitive recognition.
Wow.
It was globally acknowledged. The purists had lost. Hartl's wild experiment was permanently etched into canine history.
So what does this all mean when we look back at the whole scope of this incredible story, from freezing German shepherds failing in the snow to a wild she-wolf named Brita, to overcoming genetic bottlenecks, all the way to a global victory assembly in Mexico? What is the big takeaway for you?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at Hartl's ultimate overarching vision. Hartl realized that human domestication, while making dogs wonderful, obedient companions, had stripped away a vital ancient strength.
We made them softer.
Exactly. We had bred out their natural resilience. His quest was a successful, targeted attempt to return that wild health, that hyper-efficient metabolism, and that extreme endurance back into the domesticated gene pool. He achieved the holy grail of biology. An animal with the untamed physical perfection and biological machinery of a wild wolf, guided safely by the loyal, trainable heart of a dog.
The physical perfection of a wolf with the loyal heart of a dog. I love that. And for you listening, especially if you were stuck in a classroom staring at textbooks, I think this is why this story is so important.
Absolutely.
Science isn't just abstract math on a chalkboard. It isn't just memorizing definitions. It is a dynamic, powerful tool that literally shapes the living, breathing, running, howling world around us. Human curiosity and scientific rigor took a massive problem, isolated the variables, and literally built a biological superdog to survive the unsurvivable.
This raises a very provocative question, though. A thought to leave our listeners with today.
Okay, what is it?
We've just explored how humans were able to genetically steer a wild, untamable predator into a loyal, highly resilient partner in just a few decades through careful, targeted science. As our own global climate shifts and the environments around us become more extreme, unpredictable, and harsh, what other lost natural traits, whether in animals, in our agricultural crops, or in the very ecosystems we rely on, might we need to scientifically reintroduce just to survive our changing future?
Wow.
Oh.
Are we going to need to look back into the wild, just like Colonel Hartl did, to find the hardware upgrades of tomorrow? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see a dog that looks just a little too wild.